Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the Goodcast Show. So today with me, I have a man who came from Sri Lanka, now lives in the UK. He's a writer, he's an author. He's a main coordinator for Tamil Solidarity Organization, previously known as Stop the Slaughter. He's representative also of the Committee of Workers International. Please welcome Mr. Tu Senan. How are you, sir?
Hi, how are you, Nas?
Yeah, thank you for being here and taking the long trip from the UK just to come on this podcast, I assume.
Absolutely, yes, indeed.
Now, interestingly enough, you are someone who can give a lot of insight into the whole situation or the whole history of Tamils in Sri Lanka. I want to start from the very beginning. Can you describe what was the situation of Tamils in Sri Lanka before the inception of the Tamil Tigers?
Right. So, the Tamils in Sri Lanka, they lived there for like thousands of years. Goes a long way back in history, and they were part of the administrations under British Empire and so on and so forth. And but after the independence, also there was a peaceful living. They were a peaceful community and etc. But at the time of the independence and after, the government that is formed, in order to maintain its power, they turned on the Tamil population to attack the minority. It's complicated to go on why it's happened and so on, because in the south there was a threat of emergence of the left-wing party called LSSP at the time. In order to control them, quite a large number of Tamils in the hill country, for example, voted for them, etc. In order to counter their influence, they turned on Tamils. But also many other reasons. I'm just giving you one reason. So hence began discriminations against the Tamil minority population in terms of numbers in Sri Lanka. And that's how kind of the demand for the separate state emerged in Sri Lanka out of discriminations on language, culture, religion, all aspects.
What sort of discrimination, the entire discriminative policies were taking place?
So for example, in the Tamil areas, they only spoke Tamil language. So they made, at one point in 1956, they introduced the Sinhala Only Act, which means that Sinhala language is the only language, would be used in the government governance, for example. That's not acceptable to Tamils. Nobody knows Sinhala. We grow up not speaking in Sinhala. It's not that the Tamils don't want to learn another language, but as an administrative purposes, then it is discriminatory because it's become a second language. You have to learn in order to gain any admission into the administration, so find any job, etc., and so on. So that's one thing. And then also it carried on similar laws. At one point, the discrimination against the students took place. They introduced a quota system, standardization system, where because in the north there is not much industries existed, so they all relied on education. So they produced large number of highly qualified degree holders, etc., from the north. And because when the standardization was introduced, even once again it's a bit more complicated, then it discriminated against the northern populations where they put up certain limitations. So it's actually 30% of these students kind of not go to university after that, like who are highly qualified.
So
but
only
the quota
30%?
Was given to,
Only 30%?
No, quota was given to poor areas, etc. And so the quota, according to the quotas, so even if you are not highly qualified in certain areas, you will get an admission, which is okay. But the problem they had at the time, what they would do, these other qualified students in the north, what would they do? If they build a new universities or another job, etc., that's okay. But they're just left alone like that. They can't do anything. So these kind of discrimination continued. And at the time, of course, this is supposed to help the poor students, that particular quota system. However, it didn't actually. But the singular nationalist, Buddhist nationalist, right-wing nationalist at the time argued that Tamils are...
Buddhist nationalists?
Yeah.
Oh, I never knew that you could be a nationalist and be a
like
Buddhist.
Like Myanmar, Sri Lanka also has the same, there are other Buddhism, which is quite violent Buddhism actually. And then Buddhist nationalists are the horror. They unleashed massive amount of horrors. To this day, it's the same thing. And they argued that the Tamils are given preferences, and the people correcting the exam papers are Tamils also Tamils, so they are kind of giving them marks, etc., which is not true. But this kind of propaganda started, and it pushed the younger generation into a corner where they have to rebel.
Now, at one point, at what point was it necessary for the Tamil Tigers to emerge? What happened that they had to come up and defend the people?
The conditions were created. The conditions were created for the emergence of militancy at the time. Remember, that's in the 60s. Like the Cuban Revolution. Lots of things happened in the 60s across the world. The world was changing. And there was a hope that we can really fight and win, etc. Also existed at the time, but what happened in terms of the Tamil armed militancy, it is because of the Tamil leadership as well at the time. They promised to the Tamils that they will deliver on the democratic demands, etc. And then on the question of the national demands, for example, separate Tamil Eelam. They also kind of in a rhetoric they supported it, but in effect they're only concerned about going to the parliament, being occupying the parliamentary seat and not delivering. So when they're faced with the repression from the Sri Lankan state, and there is no political representation for them existed, they took one path they know is that they organized themselves to fight. At the time also, as you know, the PLO was formed in Palestine, etc., and so on. In certain sense, modeled on it, that they created an organization called TLO. That's the first one. Tamil Liberation Organization was formed.
Okay.
It's actually modeled on that. There's a number of people call themselves Arafat, for example, named after Yasser Arafat.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So it's following. At this point in time, when the Tamils are facing such prosecution, such limitations in the economy, what was India's involvement in this, into help mitigate this problem?
Yeah, so geopolitical tension at that time is a little bit different, Cold War period. Though India, under Indira Gandhi at the time, maintained that they are neutral, but they're not, actually. They leaned towards Soviet. So it created a lot of problems. So during the Reagan-Thatcher era in the 80s, this particular tension emerged much more sharper, where J.R. Jayawardena got elected. He's a neoliberal representation of in Sri Lanka, and he invited the Americans to open up the Voice of America in Tringo. This is an important harbor, strategically important harbor at that time, and then so the CIA also arrived and so on along with it and so on. So it created a problem for Indian government. Geopolitically, they might lose control in the South Asia, in Indian Ocean, which they consider their manner. So then, of course, in order to counter this, Indian government, their secret service called RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, they intervened and they provided weapons as well as money, cash handouts and etc. for these militants. At that time, the militants, even though they wanted to wage an armed struggle against the Sri Lankan government, they didn't have much to go with. Like, they didn't have money, they didn't have enough weapons, etc. Mainly, it came from India. So the Indira Gandhi government actually armed them, basically. So that's how they intervened. They intervened in Sri Lankan politics through this militancy, used this militancy.
Which is the Tamil Tigers?
No, all of them, not just the Tamil Tigers, all of them. Not to deliver their demands, but also in order to have a say inside the Indian politics. However, there about in the early 80s, is very politicized society in the north and east among the Tamil community, particularly in the north, were extremely politicized society. There were 36 armed organizations existed.
36 along with the Tamil Tigers?
36, yes. Tamil Tigers is one of them.
My goodness.
Yes.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. And so among them, there are a few prominent. At that time, the leading, strongest, I would argue, at the time, there is an organization called TELO. TLO, after TLO, they included TELO.
Okay.
TLO. And then
everybody was inspired by one name.
That's right. Yeah. And then they actually accepted the Indian government involvement and collaborated with the Indian government. But the LTTE didn't. LTTE wanted the money, they wanted the weapon, etc. At the same time, they wanted to maintain the independence. So LTTE did not collaborate with the Indian government.
But I thought the Indian government also provided training to the LTTE, right? They were the ones who trained them in stations in India.
Indian government did provide training, not for the LTTE.
Okay.
So quite a number of them went to Palestine to train as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they fought along with the Palestinians in Palestine as well.
So there is a connection between the Tamil Tigers and
the
very
strong
liberation.
Connections.
Okay.
Among the Kurdish and the Tamil Tigers and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They trained the LTTE as well. But the leadership of the LTTE or section of the LTTE did not go. They didn't go outside. They wanted to maintain their independence. So they didn't take part in that kind of collaboration that much compared to other organizations. There's another organization called Plot. Quite almost all the leading members of the Plot trained in Palestine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Plot stands for?
People Liberation
Organization. It's all from the same
That's
word.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so now the LTTE are there, and one thing with LTTE that is very well known across the world is they are not labeled as a terrorist organization. They were labeled as basically as freedom fighters. They were very organized. They were very well funded, even from the global Indian community, Tamil community especially. How powerful were they as an organization in their heyday?
Right. In the initial stage, they were not powerful. But then they wanted to maintain the independence. They had an extraordinary discipline as an organization compared to the rest. And with that discipline, even though they're small in number, at one point they went after the rest of the organizations, got rid of them, killed them quite a lot, and then took control of the North and East themselves. That's how the LTTE emerged as the strongest organization.
Wow, okay.
And then after that, they built a formidable organization. Military as well as political wing also existed at the time. And they even had a Navy, even Air Force. This is the only inverted commas terrorist organization had an Air Force. So it is built based on, because they also got a lot of support during the Indian intervention, military intervention, also the Sri Lankan army attack, etc. A lot of young people who are talented people also joined them. And they contributed their talent to organizing this organization. So it is one, freedom fighter for some and the terrorist for somebody else. We know the famous saying. Yeah. But but in the Tamil areas, they are kind of seen, not fully supported by everybody, I wouldn't say that, but at the same time, they are seen as defenders in certain sense. If they did not exist, and we can't really have a say, no voice. From that point of view, they have recruited quite a lot. Of course, forceful recruitment also take place in the later stages, but not in the early stages. So that's how they've grown into a formidable organization.
So at this point in time, then they are a formidable force. They have, as you say, they have different branches, Navy, Air Force and all that, ground and everything. And there was an Indian a retired commando who said that fighting the Tamil Tigers was incredibly difficult because it was their terrain. They were very well hidden within the whole civilian population and all that. So the Indians could not come in and fight them. But why couldn't they, were they unable to achieve their goal of having their own independent state?
See, it's very complicated. See, they built a military force, quite strong force at the time, but it's not enough. You need to have a political understanding as well. That's kind of taken a step back in the 90s, I would say, and also the late 80s. That's the problem. Because the Indian army was the fourth largest army at the time. It's not a really small army. The LTTE at the time, maximum number, I don't know, about hundreds, cadres, 1,000 maybe, or 2,000. They could have been wiped out. In the 1987 period, Sri Lankan army launched a massive attack in the north called Operation Liberation. and about 10,000 plus soldiers were marching down. There's absolutely no way LTT could hold them at bay because they simply did not have enough weapon or resources to do that. At the time, they're about to lose the control. That's when Indian army came. India intervened directly. So, and then again, it's a guerrilla warfare. You just go, attack, and just escape. You cannot win in that way. Or conventional kind of direct army conflict, you can't win that either because you simply do not have enough resources. So how do you win this? You need a political strategy. That was lacking. That's what the problem was. Okay. So, but they were convinced that within the context of Sri Lanka, that they somehow can defeat the Sri Lankan army, which was true at the early stage, where the Sri Lanka was a very weak state. They did not have enough weapons or big army or etc. But when they're challenged by the LTTE, India, Pakistan, Israel, starting with Israel, US, everybody helped. They armed the state. They gave all the helicopters, all the latest technology and everything, training. At one point, Israeli training, there is military in one side, the Palestinian training, the LTTE on the other side. There is an aerial photograph published by one of the journalists as well. Okay. So yeah, it's how do you fight? So how do you fight against all these states, without really building a political fight, building your allies and etc. And that's how it's failed, I think.
So that was the biggest failure. Politics was not their thing. So then we go to the most infamous tragedy, I would say, which was, I call it the genocide, which happened in Sri Lanka. Very sad, tragic, terribly tragic. Bring us back to that moment. I mean, from your eyes, from your perspective, what actually happened during that time?
Yeah, it was clear, like I just said, that it was clear that not just the Sri Lankan government, also the Indian government, all the states, West and the US and everything, they want to finish the LTTE off.
Even the Indian government?
Yes, because they fought the Indian army in 87, 89 period. And of course, nobody liked the LTTE, one thing. But you mentioned genocide. A lot of people do not understand exactly what happened at the time. When the Sri Lankan army decided to go on the attack, they just don't really go in there to kind of defeat the LTTE. They went in there to kill. Now we see, when I say this one, in the past, people find it hard to believe. Now we see the horror in Israel, Palestine, what's going on in Gaza. For example, we can see. It was under the direct advice and training of the Israeli state, the Sri Lankan government did this operation as well. It has to be registered. They follow the same method. What happened was at the time is that 10% of the population in the north wiped out in the matter of 6 months. Actually, they destroyed everything. No trees, no hospitals, no schools, nothing left standing. They were cornered into a tiny little pocket. One side is a sea, a lagoon, a small lagoon. They were driven into the small lagoon, quite a large number of population, bombed. That's how it happened. The lagoon I'm talking about, not even shelters, nothing. So this is the horror. I mean, they argued that all of them LTTE. That's the argument. That's the narrative that we see from the Israeli government. That is the same language, everything. If you go back and then see, it's everything similar. Striking similarity you can see. So that's how it happened. It's indiscriminate killing. The children said, no, everybody died. Families wiped out completely, all members of the families, etc. and so on. So what happened at the time is mass killing. Simple as that. That's how they finish it off.
And post that, what happened to the LTTE?
See, the LTTE...
LTTE. Sorry, what happened to them?
LTTE stood there and fought. In late 2008, the war started. By March, they withdrawn from their main area in Kilnochi. They withdrawn. From our point of view, the war is over by then. LTTE withdrawn. They're running. The LTTE structure collapsed and everything is completely gone. They were running around, basically. So after that is chase and kill, basically. They went after to kill. They did not stop the war, did not stop the bombing, just went on the rampage, killing everybody and finish it off. Particularly wanted to cut the head off. They wanted to kill all the leaders of the LTTE, particularly Prabhakaran, the leader, and so on. So only when they managed to finish that off, then they called that the end of war, so-called end of war. Towards the end, large number of people surrendered to the army. They were killed. Women were tortured and sexually harassed and etc. and so on. The Channel 4 made a documentary which recorded some of the heinous crimes, but not many journalists were allowed. This particular documentary was made by smuggling out few videos here or few little evidence there, done by the military themselves.
Which military?
The Sri Lankan military. Some of the soldiers sold it to the people outside of Sri Lanka. And that's how this emerged, because nobody was allowed to go in there. No reporters, nobody. Everybody kept their silent at the time. This was like a war without witnesses. That's what it's called at the time. Nobody was allowed to witness anything. And they just wiped out. And also, not only they did that, even after they'd driven whatever the population left afterwards into a camp. They were put in a camp for a month. While they were all kept in the camp, the military went and cleaned up all the places, etc., and so on, and burned down the bodies and etc., destroyed all the evidence and so on. It's systematic. I don't know. Genocide is a soft word for that. In our view, systematically cleaned up everything. This is what happened. Right. So what we have got as an evidence now is nothing. What happened to the LTTE afterwards? That's it. It's finished.
Done.
So they called. They said that we surrender our weapon. From now on, we carry on political struggle, etc. But nobody was left behind to carry on these things. Of course, in the diaspora, people lived and so on. They claim to still carry on some sort of work. Well, we can discuss what is that, and we disagree with some of them, quite a lot of them. But that's how it's ended. So LTT, at one point, they surrendered in 2009. May is 17 is marked as an end of war, where on that particular day, huge number of people who surrendered with the white flag were just simply murdered.
Oh my goodness. So what is the current status of the Tamil population in Sri Lanka?
Right. It's one of the most militarized zone in the world is the northern Sri Lanka.
And they are all there?
It's comparable to Kashmir, for example. So they are there. As long as they're just normally living there without challenging the government, they can live.
Yeah,
that's okay. If we can visit Sri Lanka tomorrow, then you can go to the north and you will not see anything. But on your way to the north, you will see huge camp, acres and acres. You will drive through a military camp. So all the big military installations exist throughout the north and part of the east. At any time, they can completely take over the whole area, the military. So the military is still there. It's still an open prison camp, some people call it. So if anybody challenges the Sri Lankan government, or anybody questions, or anybody articulate the demand for separation, or separate Tamilulam, or anything like that, they're finished. They will be arrested immediately. Not only that, they are banned from remembering who died in the war. If the university, there is some people trying to organize a remembrance last year, they were arrested, put in prison. It's banned. And then the military, there is like area where they buried these fallen cadres and etc. in the past and so on. They call it Mavir Tuilimillam, where and then military went through they bulldozed the whole area and so on. Nobody is allowed to go there and pay respect. But the relatives still there. This body is under the ground, but the relatives still alive, and they know these their relatives. They cannot pay respect or even remember them. So in many ways, and also there is now in the name of research and etc., suddenly all these different pansala, the Buddhist temples are being opened up. So it's basically cultural colonization is taking place in some part of the north, and all these things are ongoing at the moment. So nothing is fixed.
My goodness. Wow. Okay. I need a moment. That was tough. So this thing is still ongoing to that level.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, is there any possibility of the return of the LTT?
No chance of that.
No chance.
Are you talking about your armed? There is no chance. It's also there is no case. I mean, There is need to be a political fight. Nobody, there will have to be a fight because they are still oppressed. But the armed resistance is out of the questions because it will be it will be a sacrifice of people who, unnecessary sacrifice of people.
So you're saying that at this point in time in Sri Lanka, the Tamils are merely housed in a prison, in an open prison camp. They don't live life normally?
They do normal life, if you ask me, but they cannot raise their political voice. That's the problem. So as long as you go to work, do the work, come home, watch a TV or whatever it is and go to bed, that's okay.
Okay, but other than that,
other than that, you can't. If you raise political voice, for example, people like me, for example, politically active and living in North is not possible.